You're listening to the VORTX podcast, featuring interviews with your favorite artists. Here's your host, Ethan Jackson.
Hey, it's Ethan here. Today, our special guest is Alan Robert. Alan, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Dude, it is a pleasure to have you. I honestly, to be quite frank, I knew about your work with Life of Agony, but I had no idea that you were the guy behind the Beauty of Horror adult coloring book. So I am really excited to chat with you today because you've got a new one out as of today, I believe, right?
That's right. So you heard of Beauty of Horror before, but you didn't know that I did it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Seen them on shelves at Barnes and Noble. My wife
Right.
loves coloring and all that stuff. You know, she's got a couple of adult coloring books, never put two and two together. And here we are. That's awesome.
That's cool. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I'm curious, how do you go from musicianship to illustration? Was there like a connection there? Was there a love for one before the other? How did that work?
I actually started out as an illustrator.
Okay.
I picked up music kind of late in life. It was, I think, 16 years old when I picked up my first guitar. So, I had been drawing since I'm like in the third grade, like the kid at the lunchroom table drawing on his notebook, monsters and whatnot. So I always had a love for drawing. In fact, I saw Star Wars in the theater in 1977, and I remember coming home from the theater and drawing as many monsters from the cantina scene as I could remember, because, it's not like you had VHS tapes then, or you can just pull up it on your iPad,
Right.
So I just wanted to capture what I just experienced, and it made a big impact on me. So that was probably the first drawing I could ever really remember,
That's amazing. And you've done iconic characters over the years now. I mean, you've done Beetlejuice illustrations, you've done artwork for other bands, Black Sabbath, just to name one. How did you go about turning illustration into a career?
Kind of late, because I went to the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan. I actually had a famous Marvel comic book artist as a teacher. I had Walt Simonson, who drew the Mighty Thor as a cartooning teacher, and I learned so much about storytelling through visual panels back then, that by the time that 1993 rolled around, I was in my senior year of the school, and the band had just gotten signed to Roadrunner Records, and I had to make a choice. Am I going to take my portfolio around to like the comic book companies, or am I going to jump in the van with these guys and see what happens? So I really didn't think that the band was going to last that long. And I figured, in 6 months, we'll be done with the tour, and then I'll just take my book around. And then here we are today, our first show. So it's February 11th. So our first show was 35 years ago today.
Oh, wow.
So it's been a long run. So along the way, I had done tons of illustrations for the band, T-shirts. I think I've drawn every T-shirt that we've ever come up with in the last 30-something years. But also for other bands, like you said, merchandise for Black Sabbath and Pantera, Typo Negative, Shinedown. And then along the way, I think about 2009, I still had this idea from college of coming out with my own comic book. And I had written and drew it. And I said, you know what, I'm just going to self-publish this thing. It was called Wire Hangers. It was kind of like a horror conspiracy type of book, a very oddball type of book. And then IDW Publishing offered to put it out for me. And that really started it professionally, comic books and storytelling. Because once I got my foot in the door with them, I didn't want to leave, and I just kept coming up with ideas. And then Crawl to Me, comic series came out, Killogy, and then Beauty of Horror was kind of like intended to be like a one-off spoof on adult coloring. Like there in 2016, there was no horror adult coloring. It was all nature books, mandalas, all kinds of just peaceful designs.
Yeah.
And I was like, where's the coloring books for the horror fans? And I said, I guess I'm gonna have to do it myself. And it turns out I wasn't the only one that wanted it. It just kind of exploded. And here we are, book number 7 just came out today.
Yeah. I think it's funny. It was 10, 15 years ago when the adult coloring books really started to kind of ramp up, for folks who were bored of just sitting at home watching TV and wanted something to do. And this is definitely cool. And this book in particular that came out today, Backwards Records, got my copy here. I haven't started coloring it yet. I just got it yesterday. Um, but it's great. I mean, and this brings your love of music, of rock, of metal, and of, some iconic pop albums too, to life in a new way. Tell me a little bit about coming up with reimagined album artwork, where you do a really amazing job of blending not only your characters and your style, but also popular horror icons into these pieces of art.
Well, coming up with the ideas on how to make horror parodies out of famous album art. That was half the fun because we would sit over coffee, my wife, my daughter, and I, and look at album covers and talk about them. And if it made us laugh, then I would try and draw it. So there's everything in there. The more popular ones like Prince's Purple Rain, I turned into The Shining,
Yep.
and you have little Danny on his trike instead of Prince on the motorcycle. So like things like that. Um, and there's some more obscure albums in there too. You have some rap. You have Ludacris in there. You got some NWA, which I turned into zombies, so it's ZWA. There's a lot of fun in there in the book, and I think Beauty of Horror fans is next year will be 10 years I'm doing Beauty of Horror like nonstop. Um, the first couple of Beauty of Horror books were all like very themed books. There was a carnival book. There was inside of Guliana, the main character's creepatorium. But after a while, I started to do these parody books. So I had some dead celebrities was a theme. Horror movie spoofs was another theme. I did famous artwork where you had horror versions of Michelangelo and
Mm.
Picasso. So this carries over with that parody theme, and it was just a lot of fun for me.
How do you do the illustrations? Are you all like on an iPad, on a Mac, or are you drawing these by hand, paper and pen first?
I started drawing the comics. The first 2 comic series I did it was all on paper and scanning it in. And I found that doing all the art, doing all the pencils, the inks, the colors, the lettering, design of the book, if I could eliminate a step in there, that would be a good thing. So
Yeah.
by the time I got to the Trilogy comic book series, I had kind of retrained myself to draw digitally. And I got one of these big Wacom tablets. It's a giant screen. It's like 27 inches. And, the technology kind of caught up because when I was going to school years ago, you had to draw over here and look at the screen over there and try and make sense of your line work. But now like the technology is so seamless that you could really draw and and it really feels like a pen and ink. I actually prefer it. When I draw commissions or whatever at Comic Cons on paper, if I see a little mistake, I'm looking for the undo button. So I've gotten pretty used to it. Yeah.
That's awesome. Do you have a favorite from the book?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think
If you had to pick one?
yeah, there's a page in there where there's a Bob Dylan cover, and I turned it into Norman Bates and his mom, and it's the knife wielding Norman Bates. I don't know if you could see that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. You got all, and I'm such a horror fan that there's a lot of Easter eggs in here for diehard horror fans.
Yeah.
There's a lot of little details that only true horror fans would really, either see or look for. Everything from even on the Bob Dylan cover with Norman Bates, like the car that sunk into the lake is in there. And, I did an Aerosmith cover with all the Puppet Master characters, like there's some really cool stuff for horror fans in there to look for.
Well, I love too. It's not just classic horror characters either. It's not just Michael and Jason and Freddy. There's also, some of the iconic or kind of cult movies from the last 10 or 15 years, like The Babadook and others featured in here as well. And so that made me happy too, as someone who's a fan of, every decade it feels like we have a different vibe when it comes to horror. And so having kind of all of that represented was a lot of fun for me to go through and look at it.
It's cool. And I'm glad you caught that because um, I purposely didn't want to keep reusing Jason and
Yeah.
Freddy every other page. In fact, I only wanted to use them for the main covers like Kiss, you know. Um, so I went obscure on some of them, like even like a Supertramp record. I turned into Misery.
Yeah.
When it turned Supertramp into Superfan, and you got all the different iconic props from Misery, including the typewriter and the knife and the lighter fluid. Um, there's one funny one with a parody of Smashing Pumpkins,
Mm.
Melancholy, and I switched it to Midsummer.
Yeah.
So, like you're saying, it's more recent movies too.
Yeah. Midsummer is probably my favorite horror film from the last 5 or 6 years.
Mm.
Love that one. I've got a tattoo and everything. It's
Oh,
great.
really?
Yeah. Yeah. Love that movie. What are some of your favorites of the last 10 or 15 years that
Mm.
have kind of influenced your art maybe?
Well, my 17-year-old daughter is really into horror movies, so it's like taking her back to the stuff that I like growing up,
Right?
but also going to the theater with new movies. So like we saw Barbarian together and we loved it.
Mm,
Um, she loved Get Out.
yeah.
Her favorite is probably the It remake.
Okay.
So I took her to see Nosferatu and she fell asleep. That wasn't her thing at all. She was like, "There's too much breathing in here. What's going on?"
That one was yeah, if you're not into it, I could definitely see how it would be a bit of a snooze fest. It is a little slow, but no, it was
She actually woke up and there was still an hour left.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Man, that's rough. That's rough. I'll tell you what, I am super grateful for time chat with you today. And I'm looking forward to digging into this book. I'm not normally an adult coloring book guy. Like my wife loves coloring and all of that stuff. So we have everything. But I'm looking forward to doing it because this is all the stuff that I love. So I'm grateful and the book is officially out today, Backwards Records. Um, what's the next one? I know it's just out today, but you're pumping these out like every other year.
I
Are you
actually just finished one. I
okay?
finished one. It comes out in August.
Okay.
It's called The Beauty of Horror, Guliana's Sanctuary for Monsters. And it's actually a mixture of Guliana is the main character of the series. And this is a narrative story combined with a coloring book. So you could read along and then color the scenes. It's almost like coloring a graphic novel. It's kind of fun.
That's awesome. Kind of a choose your own um palette kind of with that. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
that's awesome. And you're out with Life of Agony overseas, right? In just a couple of weeks. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. We head over. We're in rehearsals now. Yep.
That's amazing. Congratulations, by the way. You guys inducted into the Metal Hall of Fame recently, right?
That's right. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I
A
mean,
huge,
I was
huge
watching
honor. Yeah.
some live footage of you guys from a couple of years ago still and some festival overseas and you guys still crush, man. It's awesome.
Oh,
It's
thanks.
great. Yeah.
Thanks. If you want to get inspired before you like pick up your colored pencils or whatever, go into Instagram and look up hashtag the beauty of horror or just beauty of horror. There's thousands of colored pages online
Okay.
that from all over the world, and the color is just they blow my mind. I'm not really a colorist. I enjoy drawing the illustrations, but people are so passionate about bringing color and life to these things. You could have the same drawing colored by 10 different people and it would be completely different each one.
Yeah. Do you have a recommendation in medium, colored pencil, crayon, marker? Is there like
The only
a
thing I would say
recommended?
for the beauty horror books, specifically, are double-sided pages. There's designs printed on both sides, so I wouldn't recommend alcohol markers that would bleed through, but gel pens and Prismacolor colored pencils. I've seen people actually use nail polish, sparkle nail polish to finish
Huh, okay.
pages. Yeah, so people get really creative with it.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Your creativity just lends to more creativity from the folks who pick it up, which is cool. So
It's a never-ending art project. That's how I look
yeah,
at it. Yeah.
that's awesome. Well, Alan, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. We appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the VORTX podcast. Catch Ethan inside the VORTX every Sunday night from 9 to midnight on Topeka's rock leader, V100.